Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. Today was disgraced former Health Secretary Matt Hancock's turn to face the public inquiry into how the government handled the COVID pandemic. Hancock said that UK's preparations were too focused on the consequences of a disaster rather than how to stop it. Over the course of 3 hours, the man in charge of public health throughout COVID said the plans put in place to protect care homes were terrible. He had, of course, previously said that he put a protective ring of steel around them. I'm joined now by care home manager and owner of Crabtree Care Homes in West Yorkshire, David Crabtree, and by TalkTV's international editor and the journalist behind the lockdown files, Isabel Oakeshott. Isabel, sum up today.
Well, today was Matt Hancock's effort to set the record straight and to try to convince everybody that he's sorry for what happened. We saw a performance there of somebody who knew he had to go through the motions of telling people that he's sorry for each and every one of the deaths. I don't say that he didn't mean that from the heart, but I don't think that will satisfy everybody who has an axe to grind about how he managed the pandemic. He had decided before going in that he wanted to make one key argument, and he kept returning to it throughout today's evidence, even when it wasn't relevant, to the irritation, actually, of the barrister. And his key argument was this, that everything went wrong was primarily due to the government having ruled out lockdowns as a strategy before the pandemic happened. So his argument is that pandemic planning should have focused on the use of lockdowns rather than avoiding lockdowns. A lot of people will say it's the precise opposite that should have happened.
Well, let's take a look at what Hancock said about how sorry he is. He's been apologising for almost everything for the last year.
I'm profoundly sorry for each death that has occurred. And I also understand why, for some, it will be hard to take that apology from me. I understand that. I get it. But it is honest and heartfelt. And I'm not very good at talking about my emotions and how I feel. But that is honest and true.
He's just a phony, Hancock. Absolute phony. Honestly, I just think he's an actor when he puts on this stuff. We saw it when he went in the jungle. We've seen it ever since. The fake tears he shed to me on G&B about vaccines. And let's get to care homes for a moment. This is a guy, of course, who repeatedly boasted about the protective ring of steel that he had put around care homes. This is what he said about care homes today.
We didn't even have the data, and this is the work that was ongoing before the pandemic, which is why this statement here from The Guardian, reported from The Guardian, is inaccurate. There was work ongoing to try to find out even the basics of the provision of social care. For instance, how many care homes are operating right now in the UK? That was a fact that we did not know.
Well, let me come to David Crabtree. David, we've spoken many times since the start of the pandemic, during it and after. Hancock had always said he put a protective ring of steel around the care homes. He also, at the start of the pandemic, boasted how well prepared the country was for this kind of pandemic. Neither of those things were true. And today he basically admitted he hadn't got a clue about what was going on with our care homes, and it was terrible. What's your reaction to that?
I'm hopeful that this is the last time that we see this individual in public, other than on a pantomime playing the villain at Christmas. He's such a self-serving, lying, inadequate sociopath. He should be sponsored by Kleenex tissues. Every time he appears in public, the brain then goes back to those awful, awful times where not just the elderly, this was dedicated social care staff, unprotected, which he then said we had a ring of protection around. The man's deluded. He believes what he's saying. Therefore, he can create this emotion within himself, but it's a lie. And I just wish now that this is an end to it. The poor families who lost, we lost care staff, we lost social care staff, we lost dedicated NHS staff. The man was not fit for purpose. He was the primary man who was supposed to look at the contingency plans. And he believed some rumour that we were the best in Europe. Who told him this? I have no idea who told it, but shouldn't he have checked? Shouldn't the captain of the ship have checked before we all sank?
Yeah, I completely agree. Let me bring Isabel. I mean, you know him very well. You wrote this book with him. I just think he's a phony, Hancock, and I think he's delusional, and I think he's desperately trying to wriggle off the hook, which, frankly, it seems more and more certain he is firmly implanted on.
There was an extraordinary moment during the evidence today where Matt Hancock admitted that he and his department didn't even know how many care homes there are in England. You would have thought that this was basic, but he admitted that the whole setup is so dysfunctional. There is so little coordination. Although his title is Secretary, or was Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, he had the top responsibility for it, but actually didn't have a clue what was going on.
There was a very, it was a pretty grim, quite literally, bit of footage when he left the inquiry, and the Grim Reaper, literally, someone dressed as the Grim Reaper appeared on the other side of the street. Watch this. I mean, pretty devastating imagery for Hancock. And frankly, I think he deserves it. I think his handling of this pandemic was absolutely disastrous.
But the thing is that Matt Hancock absolutely believes that he did nothing wrong. I mean, one of the hardest things when I was working with him was to get him to admit that there were some failures, because you can't have a book which just says I'm a hero and everything was brilliant. And he really struggled to come up with examples of areas where we got things wrong. And
Well, he can't because he's delusional. David, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, it isn't that we got things wrong. It was new and it happened across the world. We were watching France and Italy and elderly people in care homes die 2 months before it came across the water. What compounds it and what makes me still angry is that he lied. Despite the facts, this is why your comment and my comment, that he's delusional. A delusion is a false belief that cannot be altered by reason or factual evidence to the contrary. And he still does. He said he gets it. He doesn't get it.
No.
He doesn't get it.
I completely agree. He was so arrogant, you know, in his pronouncements. There's a ring of steel. We've never been better prepared. None of it was true. And we now know from his own mouth in this inquiry, he knew it wasn't true. He hadn't got a clue about care homes or how safe they were, what sort of ring of steel there was, a protective shield, whatever the phrase was that he used. Look, there's going to be a lot more coming.
He signed off on the discharge of elderly into care homes, which every scientist had told him, don't push people into care homes. It's a breeding ground.
Yeah, he did. And that caused masses of deaths. 20, 30,000 people died in care homes. Isabel, finally, you had access to a lot of WhatsApp exchanges. There is a series of WhatsApps involving Matt Hancock, I think from March, April, early in the pandemic, which have just never materialised. Where are those?
And it's really disappointing that he wasn't challenged on that during the exchanges today. I still want to know what's happened to those messages, because the missing messages, missing as far as I'm concerned, because they were not shared with me, are from March 2020, which is the key time for this particular module of the COVID inquiry, which is all about how prepared were we. We need to see those messages.
Yes, we do. Isabel and David, thank you very much. Thank you both for joining me. I appreciate it.